Wish you all a very good evening, respected seniors and my dear colleagues. With your permission, I begin the presentation of today's topic titled Beta Blockers in AMI and PMI, that is acute myocardial infarction and post myocardial infarction, with a special emphasis on the role of metoprolol in both acute myocardial infarction and post myocardial infarction. Now, at the very onset, rather than delving further into detailed discussion of today's topic, let us set the agenda a bit. Now, what we will essentially try to discuss is the exact role of beta blockers, particularly all the data that we have pertaining to metoprolol, a very popular beta blocker, and amongst the three beta blockers which have established mortality benefit in heart failure patients, congestive cardiac failure patients, and post-MI patients. And those three would include metoprolol, carvedilol, and bisoprolol. We will try to understand and analyze firstly the role of IV beta blocker and IV metoprolol in the acute phase of MI management, particularly the indications and contraindications and the exact spectrum of the early MI where IV beta blockers have a very significant role to play. Subsequently, we will also be discussing the role of oral beta blockers in the acute stage of myocardial infarction. There continues to be fallacies in the use of beta blockers in the acute MI, and how soon, whether within the first 24 hours oral beta blockers should be initiated or not. We will undertake a critical appraisal of the available data that we have pertaining to this, and subsequently in post-MI patients, the role of beta blockers, once again with a particular highlight on metoprolol, essentially trying to understand how long the beta blockers should be used, whether it's 1 year post-MI, whether it's more than 1 year post-MI, and really understand once again the fallacies of long-term use of beta blockers, rather than fallacies, essentially the efficacy of long-term beta blocker use, and compare the data between subgroup of patients with a less than 1 year post-MI beta blocker therapy compared to prolonged more than 1 year post-MI beta blocker therapy, and understand the comparison of the two groups. With this basic understanding, we delve further into today's discussion. And at the very onset, there's a lovely animation that I love, and I use this animation in all beta blocker use in post-MI and MI patient related discussion. So what we really need to understand is that your myocardial infarction, it might be the central event, but please note the myocardial infarction per se, neither it is the initial event nor it is the terminal event, but essentially it's the central event. If you go back in time from a myocardial infarction, it would essentially start from the risk factors of hyperlipidemia and hypertension and diabetes and smoking. And of course, we know that a very significant percentage of Indians suffer from hypertension. The number is significantly higher than our Caucasian counterparts in Europe or Asia, in Europe or US. Of course, I mean, the diabetic caseload of the Indian population is well known to us. 73.9 million diabetics in India, according to the 2017 IDF data. Approximately 77 million diabetics in India by the 2019 IDF data. 134 million diabetics in India projected by the year 2045. So huge numbers of hyperlipidemic patients, huge number of hypertensive patients, huge number of diabetic patients as well. And with this risk factors, subsequent development of atherosclerosis, left ventricular hypertrophy, coronary heart disease, and ultimately myocardial ischemia. And we know myocardial ischemia is essentially a demand-supply mismatch of the coronary perfusion, ultimately leading to coronary thrombosis event being the myocardial infarction, leading to activation of the neurohormonal pathway. During the course of our discussion, we will of course try to understand the role of beta blockers in de-escalating the neurohormonal activation, how sympatholysis is taken care of by the beta blockers. We'll understand how the activation of the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone pathway is also inhibited by the beta 1 blockade of beta blockers. And yes, the commonest cause of death following myocardial infarction next 1 month, next 1 year would of course be arrhythmias. The role of beta blockers in prevention of arrhythmias and subsequently sudden cardiac death, the VTAGs and the VFibs, ventricular tachycardia and ventricular fibrillation, and the role of beta blockers in reducing cardiovascular mortality in post-MI patients. Subsequent to myocardial infarction would be remodeling, and once again try to understand the role of beta blockers in prevention of cardiac remodeling. Just to add, we know ACE inhibitors and ARBs are also very important agents in prevention of remodeling, but that is a topic of discussion for some other day. Today we are highlighting our focus on beta blockers. And yes, ventricular enlargement, congestive heart failure. Once again we are looking at congestive heart failure, and we do know the different classes of agents that have mortality benefit in the management of congestive heart failure would be, of course, beta blockers, of course, ACE inhibitors and ARB group, of course, spironolactone. In today's world, we have the ARNIs, the neprilysin inhibitors, slightly expensive drug but excellent data pertaining to them. And of course, we now have the hydralazine isosorbide combination, which also has a proven mortality benefit in CHF, and the terminal event being death. So with the understanding of this cascade, starting from the risk factors to the death, with the myocardial infarction being the central event, we now delve further into today's subsequent discussions. What is the Indian scenario like? The Indian myocardial infarction and coronary intervention data, coronary artery disease prevalence and coronary interventions both are increasing in India. The primary coronary intervention registry data in 2017 shows a 3.7% growth when compared with 2016. The major indications of primary coronary intervention would be NSTEMI or unstable angina, around 1/4 of the cases, followed by chronic stable angina, STEMI, and primary PCI for STEMI. We will really try to understand the role of this primary PCI, and even in patients who can undergo primary PCI, where the door to needle time is less than 120 minutes or less than 2 hours, even in such patients, what is the role of the early beta blocker therapy, provided the patient is in KILIP 1 or KILIP class 2. PCI was performed for single vessel disease in 80.24% patients and for multi-vessel disease in 19.76% of cases respectively. So of course the higher number of cases would be for single vessel disease. More than 60% of PCI were performed through the radial route. Outcomes remain good, with reported 1.12% mortality following PCI. So really very good data. 98.88% would be the success rate, and that's a very high value. The pharmacoinvasive approach can be used because of wide geographic area, lack of centers offering primary PCI in the close vicinity of the patient, and also for financial reasons. Of course, now in Behrampur, I believe many of the audience would be from Behrampur or Murshidabad, for that matter, adjoining districts. And luckily, we now have a facility for primary PCI in our vicinity. Of course, cost is an important impediment, but I would add lack of medical awareness in the masses is also a significant factor of lack of utilization or limited utilization of the facilities for primary PCI, even in patients where the door to needle time is less than 120 minutes. So beta blockers, benefits in ACS, acute coronary syndrome. Now of course, beta blockers are anti-ischemic agents. These are anti-anginal drugs. They reduce the pain. What are the other classes of anti-anginal medications along with beta blockers? We do know that both non-dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers like diltiazem and verapamil can act as anti-ischemic or anti-anginal agents. Of course, even dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers are also anti-ischemic or anti-anginal drugs. The long-acting nitrates are considered the second-line anti-ischemic agents, and we have the 4 newer molecules like nicorandil, ivabradine, ranolazine, and trimetazidine, which are anti-ischemic drugs. But always note, all the other agents have a pronounced role in CCS, that is chronic coronary syndrome, but beta blockers in acute coronary syndrome makes them of paramount importance. Of course, these are anti-arrhythmic drugs as well, and the major role of beta blockers in prevention of post-MI sudden cardiac death is because of their anti-arrhythmic action in preventing or reducing the risk of ventricular tachycardias and ventricular fibrillations. Decreased mortality, re-MI, and hospitalization for heart failure as well. Now, most randomized controlled trials of beta blockers after MI were led before the era of reperfusion therapy and modern secondary prevention. Beta blockers have become the standard of care for AMI patients. However, clinical uncertainty exists regarding their effectiveness in reducing the mortality, and this is something that we will be doing a critical appraisal of. So, in actual role in reducing the mortality, and also patients who do not have heart failure or any left ventricular dysfunction. So, what is the role of beta blockers in patients with MI who do not have the sinister added pathologies of heart failure or left ventricular dysfunction? Now, there is no contemporary randomized data for survivors of AMI without heart failure or left ventricular dysfunction in relation to the use of beta blockers. As such, international guidelines differ in their recommendations regarding the use of beta blockers after ACS. And to answer such lacunae in medical literature, the subsequent studies that were done, we will be presenting data on that as well. What clinical factors were operative in the decision to prescribe beta blockers? Very importantly, sympathetic activation. Now, sympathetic activation leads to a number of negative consequences. It increases demand, which in the setting of diminished blood flow leads to infarct expansion. It decreases the ventricular fibrillation, something that we keep on talking about. So, ventricular fibrillation, ventricular tachycardia, major important causes of death in post-MI patients, and it does increase the propensity for sudden cardiac death. Sympathetic activation over the long run results in ventricular remodeling. Once again, another area of action of beta blockers, and heart failure, another area of action of beta blockers. So, beta blockers confer the immediate benefit of reducing the infarct size, and how much infarct size it reduces actually. Especially the early initiation of IV beta blocker in KILIP class 1 and class 2 patients, that we will see the data from the randomized controlled trial. Beta blockers also increase threshold for ventricular arrhythmias and over the long term prevent maladaptive ventricular remodeling and heart failure. Beta blockers are thus considered a cornerstone of therapy in patients with MI. So, infarct size and beta blocker in STEMI patients. The preferred reperfusion therapy in STEMI, as we know, is primary PCI, ideally within 120 minutes of diagnosis. Adjunct treatments for patients undergoing primary PCI are mainly aimed at preventing thrombotic complications, not reducing myocardial loss. So, all the role of fondaparinux that we discuss about, essentially that is not really regarding reducing the myocardial loss, but to prevent the thrombotic complications, secondary MI and all. Myocardial infarct size, and MIS is an acronym that we will be using in the subsequent part of our discussion. So, the myocardial infarct size is a major determinant of post-MI mortality. So, you reduce the myocardial infarct size, immediately the risk of post-MI death, the risk of post-MI arrhythmias, the subsequent post-MI risk of ventricular rupture, the subsequent post-MI risk of acute left ventricular failure, the subsequent risk of ventricular chordae tendineae rupture, all of them go down with the decrease in the myocardial infarct size. Patients with a large myocardial infarct size and associated left ventricular systolic dysfunction are at a high risk of long-term heart failure readmission and sudden death. MIS and left ventricular ejection fraction are well-validated surrogates of mortality. Now, routine beta blocker administration following acute myocardial infarction. Now, why is this still an unsolved issue? We really need to understand the moment the patient has acute myocardial infarction, when exactly do we want to give the IV beta blocker? Which are the subgroup of patients in which we are supposed to give the IV beta blocker? How soon do we need to give the IV beta blocker? Same are the concerns with the oral beta blockers. How soon after diagnosis? Within how many hours or how many days after the admission do you start a oral beta blocker? And once again, what are the contraindications or other the indications of using beta blockers? In which subgroup of patient can you actually use oral beta blockers in post-MI in MI patients? Now, beta blockers slow the heart rate. and have a negative inotropic effect, leading to a reduction in the myocardial oxygen consumption and increasing the threshold to myocardial ischemia. It has been hypothesized that the decrease in out of hospital ventricular fibrillation that we keep on talking about and the increase in out of hospital pulseless electrical activity that we call PEA that observed in Holland over the last 10 years is related to the long-term post-MI treatment with beta blockers and intracardiac defibrillators. Data from Holland, so long-term 10-year study is clearly showing that in patients treated with beta blockers post-MI, the risk of out-of-hospital ventricular fibrillation is significantly lesser, or the risk of pulseless electrical activity and asystole is significantly lesser as well. In post-MI patients with a left ventricular ejection fraction less than 40% or heart failure or with reduced ejection fraction, in the absence of other contraindications like acute heart failure or hemodynamic instability or high degree AV block, here in all such cases, beta blockers have a class 1 indication. Okay, so yes, we will keep on talking about the Philip classes. So here we will just highlight what the Philip class 1 and class 2 and class 3 and class 4 indicate. Now, Philip class 1 would be patients with no clinical signs of heart failure. Philip class 2 are patients with rales or crackles in lungs and S3 gallop or increased JVP. Class 3 and class 4 patients are actually patients with more significant sinister pathologies. In such patient, the role of IV beta blockers in the acute management or even oral beta blockers in the first 24 or subsequent hours is limited. Data is very limited. Indications are limited as well. So class 3 would include the acute pulmonary edema, and Philip class 4 would indicate cardiogenic shock, systolic blood pressure less than 90 or evidence of low cardiac output. Kindly note that all Philip class related data are pertaining to clinical findings. So although we mention low evidence or evidence of low cardiac output, we don't really base that upon the ejection fraction. So it is not a echocardiographic finding, but rather it's a clinical finding that we keep on talking about. So is there an ambiguity in guideline recommendation for beta blocker therapy after an MI with preserved left ventricular function? Is there any ambiguity? Well, the AHA, the ACC guidelines provide a class 2A level of evidence C recommendation. The ESC STEMI guidelines provide a class 2A recommendation for beta blocker in all patients. Be very clear about this, in all patients. Clinical practice acquired from registry and population-based studies show 18 to 30% of post-MI patients did not receive beta blocker in the acute phase with declining adherence over time. Now 18 to 30%, and this is not data from a developing country like India. This is data from Europe, and in spite of clear-cut level of evidence B that beta blockers is to be given, particularly oral beta blockers, even after 24 hours, at least after 24 hours, is to be started in all patients with MI, irrespective of Philip class. In spite of that recommendation, 18 to 30% of post-MI patients do not receive beta blocker in the acute phase. So what is the current international guideline in patients with no left ventricular dysfunction and no heart failure? Of course, if the patient has left ventricular dysfunction, no issues. You put the patient on beta blocker. Patients with associated congestive cardiac failure, of course, you give the patient beta blocker. Now, what does the ESC guidelines talk about the use in STEMI? Early administration of IV beta blockers at the time of presentation, followed by oral beta blockers should be considered in hemodynamically stable patients undergoing primary PCI. So yes, in primary PCI patients, we've seen relatively lesser number of targets are being made as to all patients receiving it. But yes, early administration of IV beta blockers at the time of presentation, it has to be given. Oral beta blockers within the first 24 hours in hemodynamically stable patient have to be given. Oral beta blocker initiation in hemodynamically stable patient should be considered within the first 24 hours. No ambiguity here, first 24 hours. Look at the level of evidence, level 2AB. For STEMI, what does the ACC-AHA talk about? Once again, oral beta blocker should be initiated in the first 24 hours in patients who do not have signs of heart failure, evidence of low output state, increased risk of cardiogenic shock. We are talking about Philip class 3, acute pulmonary edema, that is cardiogenic shock, or other contraindications to beta blocker. See, if the patient doesn't have Philip class 3 or class 4, you put the patient on oral beta blocker within the first 24 hours. Beta blockers should be continued during and after hospitalization for all STEMI patients with no contraindication. It is reasonable. Now we're talking about IV beta blocker, the role of IV beta blocker in acute MI. It is reasonable to administer IV beta blocker at the time of presentation to patients with STEMI and no contraindication to their use who are hypertensive or have ongoing ischemia. Yes, you give IV beta blockers in such cases. Now it's NSTEMI. What does the ESC guideline, the European Society of Cardiology guideline, talk about the role of beta blockers in NSTEMI? Early initiation of beta blocker treatment recommended with ongoing ischemic symptoms without contraindications. Once again, so loosely the contraindication would be KILIP class 2 and class 3. It is recommended to continue chronic beta blocker therapy, as you can see here, unless the patient is in KILIP class 3 or higher. What does the ACC talk about? Oral beta blocker should be started in the first 24 hours. Absolutely. If there is no sign of heart failure, if there is evidence of low output state, increased risk for cardiogenic shock, other contraindications. So essentially, once again, KILIP class 2, class 3 and class 4, do not put the patient on oral beta blockers. KILIP class 1 and class 2, and I hope you realize, all of us are practicing physicians tuning into this. All of us manage such emergency cases, all of us manage such critical cases. Be very clear about this, and I hope everyone would agree to us to it that majority of your patients, STEMI patients, NSTEMI patients, unstable angina patients, hemodynamically patients are more often than not sterile. Is it not? So KILIP 1 and KILIP 2 form the significant majority of the MI patients, be it STEMI, be it NSTEMI, be it ACS, be it unstable angina. Significant majority are actually KILIP class 1 and class 2, right? It's reasonable to continue beta blocker therapy in patients with normal left ventricular function with NSTEMI. And with this understanding, we are looking at the MATOCARD CNIC trial and the data from it. The STEMI treated by primary PCI results in low acute mortality. However, STEMI survivors at a high risk of repetitive events, including heart failure and death, essentially that's a huge socioeconomic burden, very huge financial burden as well. Infarct size is the main determinant of long-term morbidity or mortality. We have looked previously, we have already seen that the anticoagulation that we perform, the role of fondaparinux and bivalirudin and such agents, that these are to prevent the procoagulant state or prothrombotic events. But the reduction of the infarct size, what is the exact role of IV beta blockers in reducing infarct size? How much infarct size is actually reduced? We'll look into this. Therapies able to reduce infarct size are extensively sought. So smaller infarctions have better long-term heart performance and fewer adverse clinical events. The effect of early IV beta blocker on infarct size and long-term LV function is unclear. And this is the question that MATOCARD CNIC is trying to answer. So several trials in the pre-reperfusion area were inconclusive, multiple trials. One single randomized controlled trial in the thrombolytic era, and that too long ago, 1993. So no trials in the primary PCI era. And what do we see in the PCI era? Firstly, what is the design of the MATOCARD CNIC study? The first STEMI revascularization within 6 hours. Anterior wall MI, KILIP 1 or 2. So we can't be using it in KILIP 3 or 4 patients. So yes, one group would be receiving the metoprolol IV pre-reperfusion and the other group would be having control, that is no metoprolol IV reperfusion. Primary PCI within 12 hours and the first dose 12 to 24 hour post reperfusion. We're talking about oral metoprolol after perfusion, both the groups, because that is the standard of care. So before primary PCI, one group would be getting IV metoprolol. Before primary PCI, the other group would not be getting the primary PCI, and post PCI, first dose after 12 to 24 hours of the primary PCI would be the initiation of the oral beta blockers. So the main pre-specified secondary endpoint, left ventricular function on MRI 6 months after STEMI, and also the cardiovascular event within the first 12 months. And what does data show? We have data now. Look at this. In the IV metoprolol group, look at the number or percentage of patients with left ventricular ejection fraction less than 30%. 5.1 compared to 11.9 in the placebo group. Look at the deep green color. So left ventricular ejection fraction 46.5% compared to 38.6. And as you can clearly see, look at the p-value between the two groups. P-value is significantly low. It's less than 0.05. when we compare across classes. 202 patients completed the trial, data from 101 in the IV metoprolol group and 101 in the placebo group. Essentially, placebo doesn't mean that the patient did not receive anything. It means that the patient did not receive the IV metoprolol. So clear-cut demarcation between the data, significantly better data in the IV metoprolol group. Potential cardio protective benefit of the early IV beta blockers in the STEMI patients undergoing primary PCI within 6 hours and having no contraindication for beta blocker may play a pivotal role in the future in shifting the guideline for IV beta blocker from class 2A to class 1, especially in acute anterior wall MI, with sympathetic stimulation and 3 plus 2. The 20% drug reduction in infarct size above what was achieved by mechanical reperfusion offers great hope. Hence, early IV beta blocker can be regarded as an asset with certainty for cardiac protection. And what we conclude from the METOCARD scenic study? In KILIP 1 or 2 anterior STEMI patients reperfused with primary PCI within 6 hours from symptoms onset, the early pre-reperfusion IV metoprolol administration results in what? Reduced infarct size and slightly increased left ventricular ejection fraction at 1 week. And what did we find? That the left ventricular ejection fraction of more than 50% in the metoprolol group that occurred in as high as 46% cases, whereas hardly around 30% in the non-metoprolol group, non-IV metoprolol group. Increased long-term left ventricular ejection fraction measured at 6 months with MRI, cardiac MRI. The reduced cases of severely depressed myocardium, and the trend for reduced long-term hard endpoints driven by reduction of heart failure readmission as well. The BEAT MI. The BEAT MI, the patients were randomized to IV beta blocker for 24 hours, target heart rate being 60, or placebo within 60 minutes of PCI. So this is post PCI, the patients are getting IV beta blockers. Look at the median values, the maximum change in troponin T, look at the peak creatine kinase, look at the peak creatine kinase CK-MB, and look at the p-value. Very significant difference between the placebo arm. In the placebo arm, the peak CK, look at the average CK, it's 1300. It's less than half in the beta blocker treated group. Also the peak CPK-MB. Look at the placebo comparison between the beta blocker and the placebo. Less than half is the peak when we compare the beta blocker group with the placebo group. And all p-values are very significant. And the conclusion was that patients with STEMI who receive IV infusion of the beta blocker within 60 minutes after successful PCI tend to release smaller amounts of cardio biomarkers than those in the placebo group. So the swing of beta blockers, time for a systemic reboot. We don't have very hardcore guidelines as such recommending IV beta blockers as has been shown by the two clinical trials, particularly METOCARD CNCI, but the effect of beta blocker dose on mortality after ACS. While the use of beta blockers at discharge after an ACS is recommended and based on multiple scientific evidence, the type and dose of beta blocker is not clear. Several studies have shown that a high number of patients discharged on beta blockers don't achieve the target doses demonstrated to be effective in the randomized trials. In fact, the majority of patients receive less than 50% of the target dose. Recommendations for beta blocker therapy after an MI with preserved left ventricular function, registry data, and data from a huge number of patients. A large Korean nationwide cohort study of 28,970 patients, which investigated the association between more than 1 year therapy with beta blockers and mortality in acute MI patients without heart failure between the year 2010 and 2015, and followed for a median for 3.5 years. And see, 222,000 MI patients received beta blocker therapy for more than 1 year, whereas 6,263 received beta blockers for less than 1 year. And there was an impressive 19% relative risk reduction in mortality among patients who received beta blocker for more than 1 year. So the data is pretty adequate. The p-value is very significant as well. Not given here, but it's there in the journal. It's there in e-publication as well. So very significant reduction, relative risk reduction in the patients treated with beta blocker for more than 1 year compared to small group treated with beta blockers for less than 1 year. So the use of cardioprotective metoprolol, the cardioprotective strategy includes measures to reduce malignant arrhythmias during the acute phase of MI. The incidence of severe ventricular arrhythmias during STEMI is reduced by early IV administration of beta blockers, an effect mediated by the epinephrine blockade not only in cardiomyocytes but also in cardiac resistant macrophages as well. And just look at this data. This is the same data that we are talking about. So long-term beta blocker therapy and clinical outcomes after acute myocardial infarction in patients without heart failure, the nationwide cohort study. And what does it show? It does show you, look at the very small percentage of patients, but this 21% of patients were on beta blocker therapy for less than 1 year, so median being 2.4 months. Whereas the major number of patients were on beta blocker therapy for more than 1 year. But what does it show? It shows that, look at the right hand side, all cause death. Now look at the adjusted hazard ratio, it is 0.81. So the relative risk reduction is 1 minus 0.81, that is 0.19, that is 19% is the relative risk reduction for all cause death. Not only that, look at the confidence interval. The confidence interval is 0.72 to 0.91. It does not include 1. So this is clinically significant. This is statistically significant as well. Regarding recurrent MI, once again the adjusted hazard ratio is 0.82. So the relative risk reduction is 1 minus 0.82, that is 0.18, that is 18%. 18% relative risk reduction. Now hospitalization for heart failure. Now in this regard, yes, although the adjusted hazard ratio is 0.92, 8% reduction in relative risk. However, look at the confidence interval, it does include 1. So we cannot call this statistically significant. But regarding all cause death and recurrent MI, clearly very impressive data in the group treated with beta blocker for a longer period. And here the median use is more than 3 years. Once again, if you look at a composite outcome of all cause death and recurrent MI and hospitalization for heart failure, look at the composite outcome. Once again, the adjusted hazard ratio is 0.82. So the relative risk reduction is 18%. Once again, look at the confidence interval, it is 0.75 to 0.89. Once again, does not include 1. So this is not only numerically significant, this is also statistically significant as well. Mechanism of cardioprotection with metoprolol. The greater cardioprotective effect with earlier administration of IV metoprolol could correspond to two mechanisms. IV metoprolol reduces ischemia-related damage, slows the rate of myocardial death during ischemia by reducing myocardial oxygen consumption, or to reduce the reperfusion-related injury, metoprolol needs to be on board in the systemic circulation for some time. So earlier initiation of metoprolol is the golden hour rule. Both mechanisms are implicated in the infarct limiting size of effect of metoprolol, something that we have already discussed in our Metocard CNIS study. This dual effect on ischemia and reperfusion related injuries identified metoprolol as a unique agent for reducing ischemia and reperfusion injury. Metoprolol exerts a non-class effect against ischemia and reperfusion injury by abrogating exacerbated inflammation. Metoprolol exerts a disruptive action on neutrophil dynamics during exacerbated inflammation, resulting in an infarct limiting effect not observed with atenolol or propranolol. The differential effect of beta blockers may be related to distinct conformational changes in the beta-1 adrenergic receptor upon metoprolol binding. Now essentially I am rapidly going through it because these are essentially data from pharmacology. We are clinicians. I mean, this is the pathophysiological basis is of limited concern to us. The clinical outcome is of essence to us. The clinical outcome is of interest to us. So I'm really brushing through these topics. Cardioprotection of metoprolol during STEMI. In more than 50% of patients, efficient myocardial perfusion is not achieved despite the unblocking of the epicardial coronary artery. And this is mostly due to severe microvascular obstruction. Several interventions targeting microvascular obstruction have been tested in experimental and clinical studies. Among them, one of the strategies with more encouraging results is the early administration of the beta-1 selective blocker metoprolol. Metoprolol injected in the patients undergoing primary PCI is associated with less EMR measured microvascular obstruction. So why metoprolol? We've already looked into the Metocard CNIC trial, and it does show that the patients allocated to IV metoprolol showed that the sooner the drug was administered, the smaller is the myocardial infarct size and higher is the left ventricular ejection. Every 10 minutes of onboard metoprolol, that is what is onboard metoprolol? It is the time in which the metoprolol is already in the system, in the body. Every 10 minutes of onboard metoprolol was associated with an myocardial infarct size reduction of 1.1 gram with an increase in left ventricular ejection fraction of 0.6% at 5 days post reperfusion. The longer the time between the 15 mg IV metoprolol administration and reperfusion, the greater the MIS reduction and better the LV function at 6-month follow-up. The best strategy for attaining cardiac protection with metoprolol is to inject an IV bolus, 15 milligram as we know it, immediately after the STEMI diagnosis in patients with no contraindication. So we have looked at giving the IV metoprolol before the primary PCI, and we also now have data pertaining to use of early IV beta blocker within 60 minutes of the primary PCI, and data from both of them are pretty encouraging as we see. So which patients then should receive the metoprolol during an index hospitalization for ACS? Now we do know now any patients with STEMI, any patient with NSTEMI, any patient with unstable angina, as long as the CLIP class 1 or class 2 patient, and particularly if you have an ECG done and if it's showing that anterior MI, clearly very good indications for starting the early IV beta blocker. Patients at low risk for cardiogenic shock should be started on beta blocker in hospital to reduce the risk of reinfarction and angina, and this is applicable for most patients with an MI. Patients presenting late with large infarct size and perhaps without revascularization may have the greatest benefit from continuation of oral beta blockers, including potential reduction in mortality and sudden death. These are also patients who will have reduced left ventricular ejection fraction, where beta blockers remain the standard of care. Yes, we know that patients with heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, beta blockers are of course one of the classes of agent with mortality benefit. Now this would be a synopsis of whatever we have discussed. So you get your patient with STEMI, the patient is in a cardiac ambulance. The first and foremost, you put the patient on 15 milligram metoprolol IV bolus, shift the patient to cath lab, reduce the infarct size. Long term the patient might have left ventricular ejection fraction, and even the management for the reduced left ventricular ejection fraction is also oral beta blocker. And even after the primary PCI, start the patient with oral beta blockers, and the outcome of course will be better compared to the group not started on oral beta blockers within the first 24 hours of primary PCI. And when to start beta blockers in NSTEMI patients? Well, beta blockers are recommended in the absence of contraindication in patients with reduced left ventricular function, left ventricular ejection fraction less than 40%, to reduce mortality, repeated MI, and hospitalization for heart failure. In fact, we clearly have data to show that long-term beta blockers reduce the overall mortality, reduce the chance of repeat myocardial infarction, and overall mortality is also reduced in the group treated with long-term beta blocker for more than 1 year. Early administration of beta blocker should be avoided in NSTEMI cases if the ventricular function is unknown, especially within the first 24 hours. Always better to go for an echocardiography, look at the ejection fraction. Early initiation of beta blocker treatment is recommended in patients with ongoing ischemic symptoms and without contraindications. And we have looked at this data from both the ESC and the ACC-AHA, where clearly if there are no contraindications, and just to summarize, the contraindications would always be class 3 and class 4 symptoms. Class 3, as we know, would be acute pulmonary edema. Class 4, of course, would be cardiogenic shock, systolic blood pressure less than 90, and evidence of low cardiac output. These are the contraindications for the use of beta blockers in the initial part of NSTEMI. So the summary of recommendations for the early hospital care: beta adrenergic blocker, initiate oral beta blockers within the first 24 hours in the absence of heart failure, low output state, risk of cardiogenic shock, or other contraindications to beta blockade. And this is now a level 1A recommendation. We conclude our presentation with the final words. The role of maintenance beta blocker therapy is of course well established for patients with heart failure with or without reduced ejection fraction. Patients allocated to IV metoprolol showed that sooner the IV beta blocker was administered, the smaller is the myocardial infarct size and higher is the left ventricular ejection fraction. We conclude our presentation. Thank you so much. We are now open to questions.